I couldn't tell you why it was such a depressing feeling to fall in love.
Välkommen till Ännu en dag med Carro och Mikael. En podd där samtal kring poesi, konst och relationer varvas med vardagsreflektioner, drömmar och minnen från förr.
And I think there's nothing more magical among humanity than being vulnerable.
I denna episod har vi besök av Tea från Chicago. Språkvetare och aspirerande författare. Hon reflekterar över sina mångåriga studier av linguistik och strukturen hos världens språk, liksom olika aspekter av språklig kommunikation. Men mer än något annat bjuder Tea in oss till en personlig resa där orden format hennes liv. Sättet på vilket det skapar förståelse och upprättelse av tidigare upplevelser. Men också där avsaknaden av ord, av rätt ord, ibland skapat rädslor. Men i slutändan en acceptans för misstag, för det imperfekta och att storheten och kreativitetens moder ibland ligger i det osagda. Det vi inte fullt ut kan greppa. Hur jakten på rätt ord kan vara en väg till autenticitet. Samtalet är på engelska och den konstform Tea ger exempel på en bit in i episoden är för kännedom så kallad storytelling. En form av kommunikativ prosa som utan kontext eventuellt kan uppfattas som ett enkelriktat samtal utan respons från lyssnaren, men är i själva verket en berättartradition. En konstform där historiens början, mitt och slut är löst ihopsatta med stödord. För att efterlikna historieberättande vid lägerelden där man lyssnade till varandra. Vi hoppas ni ska uppskatta denna språkliga resa med Tea, där yttre upplevelser varvas med inre drömmar. Återigen, varmt välkomna.
So here we are today and we have a special guest from Chicago. And her name is Tea, and I will let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Tea. I am here in Malmö with Carro and Michael because I'm here for the Eurovision Song Contest. It's my third year in a row, and the reason why I love Eurovision so much is not only the music, the pageantry, the queer culture, but I am someone that has always loved foreign languages and especially foreign language music. And so not that everyone, Sweden sings in their native language, but many of the countries in Eurovision do. And it's one of the greatest ways to be exposed to foreign music, in my opinion.
Yeah. And you have some love with etymology and linguistics.
Yeah, I even have a tattoo on my right forearm. It says etymology is not destiny. It's a, sort of sailor style tattoo. It's a dagger going through a book, such as a dictionary.
Wow.
And that's a phrase that's pretty common, among linguists as kind of a joke. But for me in particular, as a queer woman, people will often argue against using singular they, the pronoun, for non-binary people. They say, this means plural. It's always meant plural. And so that's how it has to stay forever. But etymology is not destiny. And so words change, they evolve as society changes, because words are meant to serve us. We're not supposed to be serving words. And so that's why they have to change to suit our needs.
That's interesting. Words to suit our needs.
Yeah.
And so many times we have been talking about this in the recent past, about how the language can restrict us from being our authentic selves when the words of different emotions or different things don't exist.
Exactly.
And how can we serve ourselves and each other by filling that void and creating more words?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so easy to forget that language was created by humans. Of course, whatever language you learn predates you. Swedish has existed for hundreds of years. Modern English has existed for hundreds of years. But it's not a prison. It's not meant to be a prison. We have the ability to break out of the words. If we need to invent new words, we can invent new words. If we need to adapt existing words, we can do that. It's all about expressing ourselves, communicating together. Language doesn't exist if there's only one person. You need at least two people, someone to listen and someone to speak. And so as long as between those two people you can get to an understanding, then language is doing its job.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful.
Wow, yeah, that's really beautiful, because sometimes language, I guess, can be a kind of a gatekeeper to different kind of places, societies, university, or whatever, different kind of contexts. And so like to have this kind of open approach to words, that it should be adaptive, that it's something that should be changed over time. And is this like rules in society as well? The rules are for us people. We people are not for the rules.
Exactly.
So it's always have to be a kind of amazing thing to reflect upon, to zoom out and okay, wow, what does this word means? What does this rule means?
Exactly.
And you're in a context right now where there's a lot of people in the Eurovision Song context. And I guess that's a bending rule kind of a movement.
Yeah.
Everything is okay, different kind of languages.
Yeah, they said during the semifinal that people from 90 countries bought tickets to the shows here in person.
Wow.
So you hear every possible language. Just last night I was at one of the rehearsals. I was standing next to a Greek couple, so of course they were speaking in Greek. And there were people from the UK, Australia, Sweden, of course, Ireland, all over the world, and speaking not just in their different languages, but in their different accents. And so language can be a source of identity in that way, particularly if, say you're a speaker of an endangered language, a speaker of a language in a culture where it is not the predominant language. That can be a shortcut to, if you find someone else that speaks that language, that feeling of camaraderie and of belonging that may be missing in your broader life. And it's also very interesting because I have a bachelor's degree in linguistics. I worked as a computational linguist for a little while, and a lot of times people like to police other people's grammar, for example, or their spelling mistakes. If you use the wrong there in English, people might hop on you. But as linguists, we like to talk about the difference between descriptivism and prescriptivism. So prescriptivism is saying there's only one way to talk. There's a correct way and an incorrect way. And if you're not doing it right, then you're not speaking right. But linguists don't like this. What we're interested in is describing language as it is used. So that's the descriptivist approach. And so, like I said earlier, as long as two people are able to understand each other and communicate, it doesn't matter what words they use, if they're what's written in a grammar book. That's what really matters.
And I think culture and those different kind of expressions that culture have through dance, music, and words and everything.
Expression.
Yeah, all kind of expression. There is this thing that where, of course, you're in dance, you can go different kind of courses and do the dance the correct way, but there's also like the free dance. And the same thing with word, you can have different kind of poems and different kind of, and then there is the open word, free kind of flow, and music as well. You can play that kind of music, and that's amazing to learn those scales and stuff. But there's also like free form improvisation. I think in every expression it needs to have that kind of space in which some creativity flows.
Yeah. There's always room for really trying to polish, a story, a song, a poem, but there's also room for just letting the most pure expression flow forth from you and reaching inside and seeing what comes out and recognizing that it might not be perfect, but that makes it the perfect expression of your soul.
Exactly. And I was thinking about this context of knowing all the different rules and seeing all the different categories and being aware of it, and then finding your own truth and following your own spark to go in and now I'm doing something.
Yeah, I remember when I was in either middle or high school, we were learning in English class about how to write short stories. And the teacher said, every sentence has to have a subject and a verb. That's one of the prescriptivist rules of English. And as a very avid, voracious reader, I knew that I had read several books that had sentences that did not have the full sentence structure. So I brought this up with the teacher. And what she said has always stuck with me. She said, you have to know the rules before you can break them.
Yes.
Because if you're just kind of fumbling around and you're doing something that's non-standard, when you want it to be just sort of standard, then you're not going to get across the connotation that you want.
Yeah.
But if you understand what it means to use a sentence fragment instead of a full sentence, if you know that that means it's going to be punchier, it's going to feel a little strange to people that are reading it if they are familiar with the rules of English, then you know exactly the impact that you're going to have on your reader.
Yeah.
And that's really what you want as any kind of artist.
Yeah.
You want to understand as much as possible the context that people are going to bring to your work so that you can respond to it in kind.
Yeah. So it's the kind of this back and forth regarding form and the free form.
Exactly.
The non-boundaries and the boundaries. So
Yeah. Yep.
I remember when I went to school and had a Swedish teacher that was very forgiving about my spelling, because it wasn't the best spelling all the times, but he saw some kind of quality in what I was writing, and I'm not going to correct it for you because I don't want to ruin anything for you. So we had like this, and I still remember that because he keep on writing. I'm not going to go for the spelling right now because you're in some kind of something. Just keep on writing. And his name was Per. And then I had almost the same experience at the higher grade when I had a
Shout out to Per.
And also I had Kerstin later on in high school who of course I learned the spelling further on, but I remember those kind of there is a spelling and there's something else. That was what he said to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's so precious because I think everyone on some level or another has creative aspirations, but it's so easy to squash those out in children. And it's so easy to say, oh, well, of course everyone wants to be an actor. Of course everyone wants to be a painter. And when you have this clash between desire and creativity and pragmatism and reality, it's very easy to shut off those creative voices. And how many incredible voices have we lost because they've been so discouraged? So it always warms my heart to hear of teachers that allow people to be creative, to be messy, and tell them, just keep doing it, just keep having fun, because that's the thing that matters the most, that everyone has the vocabulary, whether it's through words or whether it's through colors, whether it's through sounds, to communicate that creativity that lives in their hearts.
Yeah, and I think that the kind of, where do you find the creativity? How do you sustain it, the kind of openness? Because I remember conversations I've had over the years when I was working in a school with aesthetics teaching, and I was teaching drama primarily. But I also was in the greater context of musician and sculpture and stuff. And the music teachers, they were always a bit jealous of me because I could play some piano, some guitar, some drums, but I've studied 1 year of each instrument, and I'm not that good, but I'm okay. I can, and I was just playing whenever I had the time. I just got into the studios and I just played, and I know the chords, but I don't know everything. And Michael, you're not really playing that correct all the time, and the fingers are not quite correct, but it sounds amazing, and I'm kind of jealous because they can't do it like the free form because they're too stuck in the structure that has to be in a different kind of special arrangement. And okay, so you need to learn something, but if you could overlearn it, it could be a barrier.
Yes, exactly. You can get stuck in the form of have to do it in one way. And when do you break out of something? When do you listen to your own creative voice enough to really be in your authentic flow and just do it how you want to do it?
Yeah, that's the beginner's mindset, absolutely. That which is so applicable to language learning as well, because I think a lot about what in linguistics we call the critical period hypothesis. So this is basically the idea that children up until the age of, say, 7, 9, 11, whatever the case may be, something in their brain is primed to learn language. And once you pass that age, that gateway is closed. And this is actually becoming an increasingly controversial idea within linguistics, that there is this very sharp cutoff point. And clearly there's something to this, because someone that learns a language as a baby will be able to perfectly mimic the accent, barring any disabilities or, differences in physiology. But what is also very different about children is that they're not self-conscious the way that adults are. I was living in Germany for a semester in college, and I spoke hardly any German while I was there, despite the fact that I was taking German classes full time, because I was so scared of making a mistake, of not being understood, of having to repeat myself. And as I've studied more languages and gotten older, I've realized that you need to make those mistakes. First of all, that's how you learn. And also, it just frees you. And so I think that's what's so magical about learning a language as a kid. Your parents will laugh at you when you add an extra S, or you say spaghetti or paschetti instead of spaghetti. But
Spaghetti.
Exactly. But you don't take it to heart. And you just keep chugging along. And you have this innate beginner's mindset that allows you to explore. And language learning isn't creative in the same way that writing or painting or making music is. But it's the same in many ways, I think, of taking what is inside you and learning how to express it. And it's so magical to be able to do that, even imperfectly, or perhaps especially imperfectly, because it takes courage and it takes vulnerability. And I think there's nothing more magical among humanity than being vulnerable with each other.
It makes you raw and authentic.
Exactly.
And it makes a moment in time filled with mistakes and inaccuracies to last for so long, because it feels bigger. You contract so much when you're trying to be perfect, when you're trying to make it all right, or when you're like not even letting it come out of your mouth or through your hands or out from your brain, and you're just detracting from an authentic expression, and just being vulnerable enough to let it be raw and wrong and incorrect.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And I think about the pureness of something that is not perfect. And you can see it in different kinds of things in society. You're in Sweden right now, the home of IKEA.
Yes.
and what does this Ingvar Kamprad, the owner, he said early on, if you work here, you have to make mistake every now and then. That was the rule. And people wanted to do their best, and he like, have you done any mistake? No. Okay, you get less salary. What? It's kind of, you have to do some kind of mistakes just to be able to... And just the other day, I was looking at the cinema, watching a Purple Rain movie, Principal, and I went in conversation with someone there.
This is idol.
And the way he talked with his musician was like, okay, if you do something wrong on stage during a show, do it again.
Go with it.
Do it again, and incorporate it, and we will do something about it, and the audience will not notice, and we will create something new. So instead of punish people when they're doing something wrong, if you do wrong, do it again, and I adapt to it, and we do something about it. And that's kind of a unique thing of creating in front of 20,000 people. Just don't punish yourself, do it again, do the wrong notes again, and we create something in life.
Yeah, I remembered reading a concert review many years ago, and they were talking about the perfect concert going experience. They were talking about rock bands, but this could really apply to anything. And they were comparing two different bands. One who had a very curated set list, went exactly in order, played every note perfectly. Another band who, they got up on stage, they said, well, we lost our set list, so just shout out what you want us to play. Like, we'll figure it out. And the writer of this piece went to see a second show of that first band and a second show of that second band. The first band, it was exactly the same. Perfect set list, no notes out of place, no mistakes whatsoever. It could have been in anywhere in the world, any venue. It was the exact same experience. Could have gone home and watched it on YouTube. Would have been the same experience. But that second band, they played completely different songs. Mm-hmm. It was a completely different experience. Mm-hmm. It was something that only could have existed in that place at that time.
Yeah.
And that is what is really magic, particularly about live performance.
Yeah.
And this is one reason why I love going to the rehearsals for Eurovision rather than the live shows.
Wow.
Because you do get the hosts making mistakes. Last night, Belgium had a technical issue, so they had to perform again. And there's something really magical about that.
Yeah.
That this is something, even with, you know, these millions and millions of dollars being put onto the stage, people coming from, you know, 16 different countries in Europe. And
one outside.
Yeah. Although Australia was the night before, so there was not Australia tonight, but it was very magical and just something that only could have happened in this rehearsal space.
And I would say the reason why we sit here today is because when you create something in a kind of a void of pureness or something like that, you write your words. And I had a period when I write a lot of words, and I still write every now and then. And Carro has written words, and we collided in a kind of stumble across our poems, and it was like, okay, they are created in a separate kind of free, set-listed environment. But it was like, oh, maybe not all, but 80% of that things Carro written, I could have written that. So it's when something connects within.
Yeah,
that's also sparkling, I guess.
I think that what you're talking about a little bit is when you do stuff authentically, and you're not receiving it back for many years, but you're still sending out your authenticity with your creativeness. We also have art in common, and like wanting to be in creating stuff that's useful for society and older people and young people, and like doing good.
Yeah.
And then we met. You bought a soda streamer from me. And we haven't stopped talking since then. And now the coincidence of you being my guest and coming here, and then we just started talking.
Yep.
And you were actually listening to was it called an audiobook?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, me and my boyfriend sounds wrong, but partner. Me and my partner, we're just recording a podcast, and I'm recording audiobooks, but it's wrong, you know, it's not all correct, and you know, and then you started speaking about your love for the creative word.
Yeah.
And that's how this moment happened now, because we shared something of a passion, and we communicated it. And yesterday night we were up talking until 2:00 in the morning, and we couldn't stop the conversation until we looked at the clock and we were like, oh my God,
have to go to bed now.
It's time to go to sleep.
So and you have brought some I don't know, text maybe? I don't know.
See some notes.
Yeah. Well, I fancy myself as something of a storyteller. So I think at first when we were talking about this conversation, there was the idea of maybe telling one of my stories here. So I took my notes because generally when I'm doing storytelling, I like to do it off the cuff. You know, I think it's more impactful. It reminds me of, you know, the idea of prehistoric humans sitting around a campfire before writing was invented and sharing their histories and their stories together in the only way that they could. But I do like to have notes so that I don't get lost. But
and the beauty of the rhythm of the words.
Yeah. And once again, it's just about being in the moment and creating that link between storyteller and audience. You know, I think often that there's certainly a lot of great magic in creating art that connects with what seems like everybody in the world. You know, say you have like a Taylor Swift who is clearly the biggest superstar in the world right now. She reaches out to a lot of people. But I think there's an even stronger magic in creating art that even if it only speaks to one person, if it's the only time they've ever felt spoken to.
Yeah, that's special.
That feeling.
As special.
Yeah, that feeling that you can engender that someone is not alone. That there are other people that think like them, that have gone through what they've gone through.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's something that I've definitely felt before when reading a book or listening to a song, and it makes you feel less alone.
Yeah.
And in as big of a world as we live in, that's incredible.
Not something we should feel. And so if we have the capability and the opportunities to share our authentic expression, to make others and ourselves to feel less alone, then it's so worth doing.
Absolutely.
Wow. So is there some story something you want to share with us?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Wow.
I fell in love for the very first time on November 10th, 2004, 3:45 p.m. Give or take 15 minutes. It was my freshman year of high school, and for the first time since middle school, I was with an entirely new group of people. I'd been a very moody preteen. I was struggling with what I would later learn was depression and anxiety, ADD, and I was feeling increasingly isolated and alone. I was coming into my queer identity, and it just didn't seem to match up with my friends and their lives and what they thought about. But this freshman year of high school, my 1 year at this particular school, Glenelg High School in Glenelg, Maryland, I was meeting new people. I felt expansive. I felt like the world was wide open to me, that I could meet people, make friends, and experience joy in my everyday life. I joined a club at school called the Writer's Circle, even though I wasn't doing as much writing as I had done earlier in my life or I would do later. About 3 p.m, the club let out, and I went out to the foyer of the high school to wait for my mom. And there I met one of my new friends. Her name was Bob. Well, she went by Bob, but her name was actually Christina. It was one of the many very quirky things about her that drew me to her. She was sitting on a table in the foyer, the low sunlight of the late afternoon filtering into her chestnut brown hair. I texted my mom and asked if she could pick both of us up, despite the fact that Bob lived on the complete opposite side of town. I sat next to her on that table, on top of the table. She had her knees bent under her chin. I sat cross-legged. We didn't speak much in that moment. I was reading a book. She was listening to her brand new iPod, something I was very jealous of. But after a couple minutes, I turned to my right to look at her. I saw the way the sunlight filtered behind her. I saw the way her hair shined, the way she looked so effortlessly cool in that posture, and I fell in love. I finally understood the phrase butterflies in your chest, except for me, they were more like hornets. They were angry, agitated, so excited, but violent. I couldn't tell you why it was such a depressing feeling to fall in love, an experience that fortunately has never been recreated in my life. But I just had this sense, probably brought on from my depression and anxiety, that we would never work together, despite the fact that I knew that she was also queer, that she was single, that we had the same interests. But I was just so in love with my own despair that I couldn't imagine a positive end to this feeling. That was not the only time I fell in love that year, though. I had started learning Japanese on my own as a way to understand the lyrics to my favorite songs from independent Japanese rock bands. Unfortunately, my school system did not offer Japanese as a class, but you did need to take some language in order to graduate. This is the sort of lip service that we pay in the American education system to foreign language ability. What was available within my school district was Latin. I wish I could say that I was motivated by a desire to unlock the secrets of history, that I was motivated to learn more vocabulary words, considering that 60% more or less of English vocabulary is derived from Latin. I wish I could say that I wanted something that would be academically rigorous. It was quite the opposite. Latin just seemed like the easiest option. You didn't have to speak, you didn't have to listen. It sounded good to me. But what I wasn't expecting was how good at it I would be. For whatever reason, something in my brain just really clicked with the scientific precision of Latin translation that has been the standard for teaching the language for millennia, really. And as I made flashcards for every unit of vocabulary in Latin, I would also look up the words in Japanese. So for example, if we had the word for to sit in Latin, I would look up what it might be in Japanese. The problem with learning this on your own, though, is that you don't know if the words that you find are actually the most appropriate. So say, for example, you were looking for the word to sit in English and you found the word hunger. It's not entirely incorrect, but it's really not what you're looking for. But still, just the ability to reach out. This was during some of the early days of the internet, and people were so giving of their time and their knowledge, creating these expansive websites with all sorts of resources that you could use. I was able to find bilingual dictionaries. I was able to find, lyrics for my favorite songs so that I could struggle through and try and translate them myself. And so the more I dug into this world of learning not just Japanese, not just Latin, but the connections between them, learning about the way that you indicate a direct object in Japanese versus in Latin versus in English, it all felt like a new world opening up for me. And as much as I despaired of ever actually having a relationship, ever going on a date with Bob, I reveled in my new solidity in my queer identity. There have been times when I've waffled back and forth about whether I have any interest in men, but ever since that day, November 10th, 2004, 3:45, give or take 15 minutes, I knew there could be no doubt that I had the capacity to love women. Those hornets that came out of my stomach and opened up my world would never let me doubt it again.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. 15 minutes of magic. It changed everything.
Yeah. And can you tell us more about your text? Is it autobiographical, maybe?
Yes, it is. It is all true. Names were not changed, which I think is a liberty you can use when someone goes by Bob, which is not their actual birth name. It was a very formative period in my life, and so it felt very important to me to write about it. And people often talk about the 7-year itch, that if you want to write about something that's happened to you within the last 7 years, it can feel very vulnerable and very raw, and often too vulnerable and too raw. And say, if you're writing about other people that may read it, that it may be very raw for them. But that once you get past 7 years, you have that sense of perspective, of distance. And perhaps, coincidentally, perhaps not, that's also the average time that it takes for your cells to replace themselves. So it's not completely accurate to say that we're entirely new bodies every 7 years, but it's not entirely inaccurate either. And so through that process of renewal, of growing and becoming someone new, you can go back on your past and review and recontextualize and come to understand yourself better by looking back on what's happened before.
And maybe like the 7-year period, maybe it's also about what you do with it.
Absolutely.
Like if you're content with the persona that you've made, and you don't try to rearrange the pictures or the images or the feelings or the emotions or the happenings, then maybe there won't be. It will be same but different.
Yeah.
You mentioned those 7 years, and then it's like it's kind of a relief that something that you changed, but it's also like it's kind of scary in some way.
Yeah.
I talk about that many times during the years when I have worked with therapy and stuff and change, and people who went through horrible things and also identity crisis in different kind of aspects. That think about that if it's 7, 8 or 9 or 10, in a couple of years most of the things have changed in your body. There's something in the teeth and in the spine that never changed, but let's say that 80% of you is new. It's kind of it's hard to grab that kind of perspective, that you have the ability to be a new person in some aspect if you look at the physical stuff, and then can you also adapt kind of a different kind of spiritual change, or how you react to relationships and stuff.
Absolutely.
It's a big potential. Scary, but also lots of potential in try to grasp that 7 years.
And one thing that I find very magical, particularly talking about this story, is that certainly for probably longer than 7 years, when I would think back on that period of my life, it would be with regret. It would be fantasizing about being able to go back in time and do it differently, to instead of hunkering into myself and into my despair, to just turn to Bob and say, hey, you want to make out? And, who knows what would have happened, but at least I would have approached it with openness and with possibility instead of being closed off and imagining impossibility. But as I've grown older and I've realized how much I was shaped by the experiences back then, and how I wouldn't be the person that I am today without it. And I think back on, older versions of myself when I was 13 or when I was even younger. How would that little girl view myself now? And in writing, it becomes easier to see how much, at least for me, that little girl, that teenager, would be amazed by who I am now, would be so impressed, would be, probably obsessed with me the way I was with, a lot of my cooler older cousins and my brother's friends. And by recognizing that, it allows me to have a lot of tenderness for that younger version of myself, and so much empathy and love and warmth. And Carro, you were talking about this the other day, about imagining your inner child and imagining hugging them and supporting them. And that was such a powerful thing that no one had ever really said to me before, although something inside me felt that. And it took you putting it to words to just imagine that even though I can't go back in time, I can still
show up.
Show up and embrace that inner child and give her the love that she needs.
And that can still be an ongoing relationship. The hurt little us, the hurt little you, is still there waiting to have a conversation, to have a hug, to be seen, to be felt, and to be acknowledged. And one of the biggest impacts we can do with our relationships with ourselves is having that, like holding that hand. And at first we might not even be able to hold our inner child's hand. At first we might just like look at it from across the room, because we have created such a void, such a distance, we haven't acknowledged the feelings and the emotions, and we have shamed them and pressed them down in different ways and try to adapt to society, family structures, a school, what people accept from us, and always trying to find an identity in things that are already existing. And I feel that society many times can be like post-it notes that says different things. And when we want to find ourselves or put an identity code on us, we just fumble in between these post-its and we just grab them and then we just say what it says on the post-it. And I just feel that I don't feel that it's authentic.
Yeah.
I don't feel that we have the words to be authentic enough.
Yeah.
I don't think that any input that is loud enough, because so many of the movies and the music and different religions and dominant voices and they are so loud that they deafen out everything else. And when a little creative voice want to come out and says, well, I want to paint it blue, and then they say, but what are you talking about? That is just stupid. And then we internalize that, and then we become our own prison guards.
Yeah.
And we just vanguard this, and we just chuck along in life, repeating those shit, that, and we just repeat it, and then we just fuck. It just makes me so mad that we don't have enough liberty in authenticity.
Yeah, and of course, we live in a society, humans have to get along, but so often for people that turns into, well, there's only one way to be. And things are a little better than they were in past decades. Maybe now there are a handful of ways that you can be. There's not just one way to be a woman, for example, or one way to be a man. But still, there's certain expectations of being a queer woman or being a queer man, or even certain expectations of being a non-binary person.
Yeah, but it's always expectations on everybody.
Yeah.
But we just love to put labels on everything so that we can find a victimization within what we have chosen to put as labels.
Yeah, those labels are shortcuts to ways of being, to prescriptions for how to exist.
Yeah, instead of just...
Yeah, I can relate to it. I think it's a kind of the same discussion we had when we like, this is how you play, this is how you do this kind of novel.
Yep.
Because the bigger the world gets, the more hard it is just to grasp it. And I need labels. We so it's kind of the more alternatives we have, the more we have we get stressed by it, I guess.
Yeah.
So
overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. So I think it's kind of natural. But if we zoom out, yes, we get more options, maybe in some aspect. And we have to work with those need for labeling. And as we said, the magic happens when we do wrong.
Yeah.
When we find that kind of middle space of freedom. So that's kind of, yes. I thought it was interesting you said about this what ifs. What if I've done that?
Yep.
And that's something that I think everyone struggles with.
Yeah.
The sliding doors kind of
yep.
thing.
Absolutely.
So what ifs? And we got so many what ifs, and I think there's a good thing to stay and reflect upon those. Yes, but you can also be stuck with them.
Absolutely.
So it's also the kind of, we always talk about balance. Labeling to be able to get along, non-labeling to get freedom. And it's I guess it's the same thing here. Or reflect back on the sliding door moment. What if?
Yeah.
But also let it go.
Yeah.
And maybe the storytelling, the way words can just be a way of building that bridge.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and when I think about labels, I think about that same debate between descriptivism and prescriptivism.
Yes.
Prescriptive labels are prisons. They're limits on how you can exist. But descriptive labels are ways of communicating effectively and efficiently what is important to you. So, I don't want anyone to tell me that there's only one way for me to be a queer woman, but it's also very important to me that people know that about me, because that's something that's very central to my heart and my life. And so for me, it's a descriptive label. And I think that is where labels can be useful and where they can be damaging. Is it a description or is it a prescription?
And how many years, can you tell us how many years ago it was since that moment with Bob?
It's almost exactly 19 years and 6 months.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
19 years. And when we're young, we think 19 years are so humongous.
Yeah.
Leap. And as life passed by, we it's so close. Everything that happened that was so important is still so close.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel like maybe it was 19 years ago.
Exactly.
Or 20 years or 50 years. It still feels really, really close.
Yeah. Yeah. Just as so many cells in our body replace themselves, our neurons don't. And so it's still the same brain matter that experienced that almost 20 years ago. So in some ways, I'm a completely new person, almost 3 times over. And in other ways, it's exactly the same as it was back then.
The same chemical reaction, the same buzzing feeling.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm thinking about, we have to take part of your story here. It's amazing. It gets me thinking about writing stories and the need to talk stories. And I guess some episodes ago we talked about storytelling for our kids. And we have different kind of warm feelings about it when we have read for our children. And I explained that what my children appreciate most was when we did this kind of, I was telling 3, 4, 5 sentences, and then she continued, and then my son continued. We created a story together. And it always got crazy, and we laughed. And but that was kind of a storytelling in a moment. That's kind of amazing. But my question for you was that this story that you've written about Bob, how does the text, how do you work with stories on a daily, do you take notes, or do you put your stories inside, or do you talk to, how do you
Yeah, so it's a little different for, every kind of story that I write. This is an excerpt from a project I'm working on that's something of a combination memoir, language learning log, language learning kind of advice book. Because it's, I've studied to some extent or another more than a dozen languages. Sort of similar to how you were talking about how, you spent maybe a year learning piano, a year learning guitar. That's my approach to languages a lot of the time. I joke that I can learn 10% of any language, but it's the other 90% that sometimes, of course, takes more work. But so for this, I was doing it a little bit in response to the first draft of a novel that I wrote during the pandemic. And that novel I wrote by hand, in cursive, and which was a lovely experience for me. But once I was done and wanted to start iterating on it, wanted to start sharing it with people, a physical copy of non-waterproof, non-archival ink is not the best way to do that. So then, I have to go back and type it up, and it's been, I guess, 4 years since then, and I've only written up or typed up about 10% of that novel. So for this project, I wanted to make sure that it would be something where I could not have to work quite so hard to get it into a digital format. So having such a passion for live storytelling, I actually have been recording it as voice memos on my phone. A different one for each chapter. And the benefit of that is that you get the auto transcription, which is not perfect, but it's much closer than a handwritten 3 notebooks like that novel is. So I have about a third of it written so far in those voice memos. And it's, like I said, it was at first just a decision to make it easier to get it into a digital format. But it's so incredible to be able to go back and listen to these voice memos instead of just reading it on the page.
Yeah.
And to feel the emotions that I'm putting into it and making sure that I'm conveying that properly just in the text. If this is something that I want to publish as a written text. And that's one thing that is so fascinating to me about the written word, because the written word is a representation of the spoken word. And there's that interplay between the two. You can have something that's spoken live, not meant to be written down, but then you can transcribe it. And likewise, you have something that's written down and you can release it as an audiobook. And then people hear it and hear, an actor getting into it and giving that emotion and doing different voices for different characters. And it's fascinating how it can exist simultaneously in spoken and written form.
How it takes life.
Exactly, yeah.
And I have to say, your handwriting is absolutely breathtakingly beautiful.
Thank you.
It's mesmerizing and divine and gorgeous. So I feel like your written word should be also available for people to look at and just enjoy. Because it's gorgeous.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, about, of course you write a novel, for example, or a memoir or whatever, and you have thoughts of what's it, can you get it published? What's it going to be like? How many people are going to read it? And just having kind of idle thoughts of, maybe even after I'm gone, someone coming across the rough draft in that physical written form in my own handwriting, and maybe no one will care, or maybe it'll be international news because I'm so famous and my works are so beloved. Not that I really think that is even the path that I want. I think for me it's much more important to speak to that one person who's never been spoken to than to speak to everybody.
Yeah. So that's actually kind of a good way to sum this one up, because we started by talking about your history, our history, and then you gave us something with Bob that has been many years ago. And then now you talk about different kind of projects. So if we meet next year, because Sweden gonna win this Eurovision once again, So
talking like a proud Swede.
Yeah, of course. So there's no doubt about that. So what kind of this project, the memos, what would you like to be? Where would you be?
Yeah, I would love to have finished this project, have finished typing up my novel, have, started making inroads into getting it published or getting an agent. And, I really would just love for someone who's never met me, who doesn't know anything about me, to pick it up and just to feel a little less alone, a little bit spoken to.
Wow. And you made us feel anything but alone, because it's a nice connection, and it's such a relief and such a blessing to be able to connect with people from all over the world. And we talked about the other day when we talked about music as something that connects people, and Eurovision is a great example of that. And I have stories myself of going around world with music concerts, and it's always the best, nicest people I met during those contexts. So, I don't know if
you've certainly made me feel less alone being a soul traveler on the other side of the world. How special to be able to meet someone and two people no less, who I can talk to about this kind of stuff and not feel alone at all.
So thank you for sharing. I don't know, Carrie, if you want to say something to end this.
And now you made me emotional.
Good.
I feel like I have a little crying in my throat. But I think it's been like really beautiful, like you choosing to be a guest in my home, and us connecting with like life and experiences and relationships and finding one's true self, and and the voyage of wanting to be more authentic.
Yeah.
And letting it be heard and seen in the world.
Yeah.
So we can conclude with this and say thank you.
And thank you for not just inviting me on this pod, but inviting me into your home.
See you next year.
Så, tack så mycket för att ni har lyssnat på det här avsnittet av Ännu en dag med Carro och Mikael. Vi vill så gärna veta vad ni tyckte, tänker och reflekterar över och ser fram emot era kommentarer. Gilla, följ och dela med dina vänner, nära och kära. Och slutligen, glöm inte att vara kreativ i vardagen och att då och då stanna upp och samtala med någon på riktigt. Vi hörs snart. Hej!